The day had started like any other. The sun was already climbing high in the sky, casting its golden rays over the sleepy town where I lived. I had woken up early, just like I always did, for a quiet morning walk. I'd been living in this small town for a couple of years now, and it felt like home. There was comfort in the simplicity of it all. The people were kind, and life moved at a steady pace. Nothing too fast, nothing too slow. But that day, as I walked into the local clinic, something in the air felt different. Maybe it was the way the receptionist greeted me, or how the other patients in the waiting room glanced up and then quickly looked away. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My name is Robert Jackson, and for most of my life, I had taken pride in being a good person. I worked as a computer programmer at a local tech firm, and my job was decent. My family was close-knit, and we supported each other through thick and thin. But I had my fair share of struggles. One of those struggles was dealing with chronic back pain. For months, I'd been trying to ignore it, thinking it would eventually go away on its own. But recently, the pain had gotten worse, and I couldn't focus on work anymore. My days were becoming unbearable. So, here I was, sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Samuel Mitchell's office. I'd heard about him from a few friends. He was supposed to be a well-respected physician in the community. From everything I'd heard, he had helped countless people with issues just like mine. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that today would be the day I would encounter one of the most difficult experiences of my life. When they finally called my name, I stood up and walked toward the door, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I followed the nurse down the narrow hallway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet space. As I entered the examination room, I was greeted by Dr. Mitchell. At first glance, Dr. Mitchell seemed friendly enough. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. His smile, though slightly forced, seemed to put me at ease for a moment. But there was something about the way his eyes scanned me that made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't just a quick glance, it was as if he was sizing me up, evaluating me in a way that felt wrong. "Mr. Jackson, I'm Dr. Mitchell," he said in a voice that was smooth but lacking warmth. "What brings you in today?" I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just get straight to the point. I hadn't been to a doctor in years, so I wasn't sure how to approach it, but the pain in my back was unbearable, so I decided to be honest. "I've been having chronic back pain," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "It started a few months ago, but it's gotten a lot worse lately. It's affecting my work and daily life." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly, his eyes still focused on me, but not in a way that made me feel like he cared. "I see," he muttered. "How long has this been going on?" "About 6 months now," I replied, sitting on the examination table. "It's mostly lower back pain, and it shoots down into my legs sometimes." He seemed to consider this for a moment before picking up his clipboard and writing something down. I couldn't help but notice how he kept glancing at my clothes. I wasn't dressed poorly, but I knew I wasn't dressed like someone who could afford the fancy office and all its expensive equipment. I had on a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. It was comfortable and casual, but not exactly what you'd expect in a high-end doctor's office. Dr. Mitchell finished writing something and set the clipboard down, his eyes finally meeting mine. "Well, Mr. Jackson," he said, his tone colder now. "You seem like a fairly fit individual. I don't think you should be having these kinds of problems unless you've been overexerting yourself. Are you sure you've been taking care of your body?" I felt a pang of irritation at the judgment in his voice, but I kept my cool. "I've been trying to stay active, but the pain has been hard to manage," I explained. "I just need to figure out what's causing it." Dr. Mitchell didn't seem to be listening. Instead, his eyes wandered once more, landing on my sneakers and then on my face. The look on his face turned cold, as though something had triggered an immediate judgment. "Well, I don't think you're in the right place," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "This isn't a charity, Mr. Jackson. People like you don't usually come to places like this for medical attention. Maybe you should consider seeking treatment elsewhere." I froze. My heart raced in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him correctly. Was he really saying what I thought he was saying? I could feel my face flushing with a mix of confusion and anger. I'm sorry? I asked, my voice shaky but firm. What do you mean by people like me? Dr. Mitchell crossed his arms and gave me a pointed look, his expression hardening. You heard me. People who look like you don't usually have the money to afford proper health care. Maybe you should check with your insurance to see if they'll even cover anything. My stomach churned, and the words felt like a slap in the face. I wasn't sure what to say at first. The room seemed to shrink around me. My thoughts raced, and I tried to make sense of what had just happened. You're discriminating against me because of how I look? I finally said, my voice low but steady. You think I don't deserve care because I don't dress in fancy clothes? Dr. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, as though he couldn't understand why I was making a big deal out of it. That's not what I said, he replied dismissively. But I'm not going to waste time on someone who clearly doesn't understand how things work around here. His words stung, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. My hands clenched into fists as I stood up. You're wrong, I said, my voice growing louder now. You're being incredibly unprofessional and rude, and I'm not going to let you treat me like this. Dr. Mitchell seemed unfazed. He simply turned to his desk and began writing something on a prescription pad, as if he hadn't heard a word I'd said. That's when I realized he wasn't going to help me. In fact, he wasn't even willing to listen. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, mixed with anger. How could someone who was supposed to heal others act this way? I had come to him seeking help, and instead, he had chosen to judge me based on nothing but my appearance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking. I called a number that I knew would make all the difference. After a few rings, the voice of my friend Laura answered. Laura, I need your help, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm at Dr. Mitchell's office, and he just refused to treat me. He said, I don't belong here because of how I look. There was a pause on the other end. Laura had always been a fierce advocate for what's right, and she wasn't about to let this slide. Don't worry, Robert. I've got this, she said, her voice filled with determination. I'm going to call the clinic right now. Just stay put, okay? Within minutes, Laura was on the phone with the clinic's corporate office, explaining the situation. I could hear her voice rise in anger as she demanded answers. When she hung up, she told me they would be sending someone to the clinic to handle the matter personally. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, a woman in a sharp suit arrived at the clinic. She introduced herself as the regional director for the company that owned the clinic chain. She walked into Dr. Mitchell's office with a calm, authoritative presence, and immediately, I could feel the tension in the air. Dr. Mitchell, she began, her voice cool but firm, I have received a complaint about your treatment of Mr. Jackson, and I need you to explain yourself. The doctor stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but the regional director wasn't having it. You will be reported to the medical board for discrimination, she said, her voice unwavering, and your actions today will not be tolerated. I suggest you pack up and leave. As I stood there, watching Dr. Mitchell's face turn pale, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just for myself. It was for every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of their appearance, their background, or anything else. I walked out of that clinic that day with a sense of pride in myself. But more importantly, I felt a deep sense of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. The regional director had escorted me out of the clinic. Her expression one of calm professionalism. She had assured me that the matter would be dealt with swiftly, and that I would be receiving an apology from the clinic's management. I wasn't sure if the apology would ever feel genuine, but I appreciated the steps she was taking to make things right. As I walked down the clinic steps, my phone buzzed. It was Laura again. Robert, they're taking action, she said, her voice full of relief. They've confirmed that Dr. Mitchell is being put on leave, pending an investigation. They're going to make sure this kind of behavior doesn't happen again. I leaned against the railing outside the clinic, taking in the cool air. For the first time that day, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was one small victory, but it felt powerful. It wasn't just about me, it was about ensuring that no one else would have to face that kind of treatment. Thank you, Laura, I said, genuinely grateful. I don't know what I would have done without you. You really came through for me. Of course, Robert. You didn't deserve what happened, and you should never have had to deal with it. I'm glad you stood your ground. Her words meant a lot to me. I had been in such shock when Dr. Mitchell first rejected me. I didn't know how to respond, and part of me wondered if I had imagined it. But Laura's unwavering support reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. There were people out there who cared, who would stand with me against injustice. I didn't go back to the clinic that day. But in the days that followed, I did some thinking. The incident had stirred up feelings I hadn't realized were there. As a Black man living in a predominantly white community, I had grown accustomed to certain types of treatment. I'd learned to brush off the occasional side-eye, the comment made just a little too loudly in public, or the assumptions that people made about me based on my skin color. But Dr. Mitchell's behavior had struck a nerve in a way that those other incidents hadn't. Maybe it was the fact that I had gone there seeking help, trusting that he would treat me with respect, only to have him judge me solely on my appearance. Or maybe it was because I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I was in a position to make a real change. I wasn't going to let this slide. I couldn't. So I decided to do something about it. I contacted the local news station and told them about my experience. At first, I wasn't sure what they would do with the story. It felt almost surreal to be telling a stranger on the other end of the line about my encounter with Dr. Mitchell. But when the reporter expressed genuine outrage and promised to look into it, I realized that maybe this was the push the town needed. It wasn't just about me. It was about accountability and ensuring that no one else would face this kind of discrimination. The news segment aired the following week, and it sparked a conversation that I hadn't anticipated. People were outraged, but they were also supportive. A lot of people reached out to me, some with stories of their own experiences with discrimination, and others simply offering words of encouragement. I didn't realize how many people had faced similar treatment. It was humbling, and it gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. The backlash against Dr. Mitchell was swift. The clinic received numerous complaints from both patients and fellow healthcare professionals, and the medical board launched its investigation. The local community rallied behind me, and it felt like something was shifting. People were finally speaking up about the way they had been treated in similar situations. Some even praised me for standing up, for not letting the doctor's words slide, and for not accepting the injustice. Eventually, Dr. Mitchell was let go from his position at the clinic. It wasn't just a matter of him being rude or unprofessional. His behavior had crossed a line, and the clinic's management knew they couldn't keep him on. They promised to improve their hiring practices, ensuring that their staff treated every patient equally, regardless of their background or appearance. In the weeks that followed, the experience weighed heavily on me. While I felt a sense of justice, I couldn't help but think about all the times people had been treated unfairly and hadn't had the opportunity to fight back. I felt privileged in some ways because I had a support system that helped me get through this. But there were countless others who didn't have that chance, who had to endure mistreatment without a voice. One night, as I sat in my living room, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized something important. This wasn't just about a racist doctor or a single moment of injustice. It was a reminder that we all have a role to play in making the world a better, more just place. No matter how small the act, we can all stand up for what's right. As I stared out the window, the setting sun casting long shadows on the pavement, I felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more people to stand up for, and more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, I believed that change was possible. Change started with people like me, people who were willing to say enough was enough. And as I thought about it, I couldn't help but smile. I was proud of what I had done, and I knew that no matter where life took me next, I would always stand up for myself and others. No one deserved to be treated unfairly, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget it. The world might not always be kind, but it was up to us to make it better, one action at a time. And if the story of Dr. Mitchell and me could teach anyone anything, it was that sometimes the hardest lessons come from the most unexpected places. That was the moment I truly understood what it meant to fight for what was right, no matter the odds.